Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Happy Veterans Day to all my fellow veterans out there. I sure appreciate your service. Means the world to me, means the world to the country. No matter what you did, I hear often from people that, well, I just was a cook, or oh, I was just a this, or I was just a nurse, or I was just a doctor, or I was just I was just a crewman on a helicopter. I was just a crew chief on a plane. It all matters. It all matters. Every bit of it. The maintenance people, everybody, it all matters. It's all a team. And every single person has proven in the last few wars that we've had, every single person is putting your life on the line. Even if you're truck maintenance, you're putting your life on the line by serving. So thank you so much for serving. I appreciate it, and I'm honored by your service. Absolutely. Absolutely. Why not? Why not? All that said to say this, I really appreciate the gold stars today, even though this is not Memorial Day. I know it's super tough on them. I know many of them. I've taught many of them in my Living Through Grief on Purpose workshop. Many of those are in Tucson, Arizona right now, and living in the glow after the Rockin' for Heroes benefit concert. Utterly amazing. We were supposed to go. We got to the airport, and unfortunately, this didn't work out. The weather. Hey, Heather, good to have you. The weather. By the way, welcome to all of you listening through whatever means you're listening. We're streaming to, I don't know how many platforms right now. And then if you're listening on playback on the True Word Faith for Life podcast, audio only, Face for Radio podcast, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. I do. It means the world to me. You got a million things you could be doing. Now you're doing this. So anyway, we were at the airport. We had our bags packed. Actually, we had Missy's bags packed because Missy was kind enough to loan us her fancy, pro traveler stuff. And we had it all packed up. Colleen packed it all up nice and had everything. And all set to go. And flights were canceled because of the weather over Dallas-Fort Worth. And they tell us thousands of flights were canceled nationwide. So the thing I felt worst about was all of the military members just trying to get home to their family. That bothered me. It bothered me. Good morning, Martin, my brother. Good to see you, man. Not guten Tag. Guten Morgen. I don't know. I'm guessing that. Anyway, buenos dias. He speaks 7 languages, so you can just pick one. Anywho, it's good to have you all listening. I really appreciate it. So, okay. The title of this, and I don't know if you saw the thumbnail. I encourage you to look at the thumbnail. I was pretty proud of that one. What's on the menu? By the way, really quick, I do want to tell you that I've been invited to appear on Mondays as a regular guest at 1 p.m. at Christopher Brock Ministries YouTube channel. And so I'm going to be there every Monday, including this Monday. And so this was just decided a little bit ago, and I'm excited about it. I'm excited for him. I'm excited for me. I'm excited for the audience. And so I'll put the links and everything all over the place, the descriptive information and all that. So anyhow, so here we go. What's on the menu of God? Tots. I hope it's Tots. I do hope it's Tots. I love Tots. I'm addicted to Tots. Crispy Tots. A little bit of salt, Himalayan salt, maybe some Celtic salt. I don't know. It's fine with me. A little bit of ketchup. I don't need sugar in my ketchup. Sugar-free ketchup is awesome. So, yeah, I love Tots. You'll see throughout this, I've got a problem. And that's the first step, is to admit you got a problem. So a buddy of mine recently asked, by the way, happy Veterans Day to Dennis. Thank you for your service as well. He asked me, so what did the people eat in the Bible days? And then I immediately thought, did they have tater tots? Did they have tater tots? Because they could have cooked them. So it got me thinking about the diets described in Scripture. So I took a long, I know, and I can't eat right now. I've got some issues, but trust me, I could skip a few hundred meals and be all right. But Heather, I'm sorry for making you hungry. By the end of this, you're just going to be famished. So I did a deep dive in Scripture. I knew some of the stuff off the top of my head, but I did a really deep dive because I thought, you know what, this is worth. I challenge you. Look, somebody that doesn't like Tots, Heather just said, I love Tots. By the way, if you're listening on playback on the audio version, the True Word Faith for Life podcast, anywhere you listen to them, iHeartRadio, Spotify, iTunes Radio, rate me on all those if you would. Just give me a rating and a review or whatever. That helps so much. I'm trying to build that. All that said to say this, I don't know anyone, and maybe you put in the comments, if you're a person who just doesn't like tater tots, you say, look, I appreciate your love of tater tots, but I don't love them. And then maybe why? Why don't you love them? And then maybe if you do love them, how do you like them? Now, I know some people, like my son, my son Doyle does not like fries crispy or Tots crispy. I'm pretty sure he doesn't like Tots crispy. I don't think he's listening right now, but if he is, maybe his mom could tell me. I know he doesn't like fries crispy. Anyway, so all this stuff, I just love Tots. Tots are just beautiful, beautiful things. But in my study of Scripture, brought me to two different things. Pre-flood diet, Adam and Eve's plant-based menu. And so in Genesis 1:29, yes, we're actually getting started. Genesis 1:29, God gives Adam and Eve a plant-based diet in the Garden of Eden. It was there. So then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. That's Genesis 1:29 if you're writing it down. Hey, Ted, good to see you, man. Thank you to all of our YouTube channels and our Facebook and our Twitch audience. We're so glad to have you. That means so much to us. Let me see here if I can adjust this. Destinations. Yep, we're streaming to them all. Anywho, how do I sound, by the way? Oh, Ted, we've just been talking about that. Yeah, Tots, man. Tots are beautiful, beautiful things. How does this sound? Is this too loud? Not loud enough? Just let me know. Crispy little potato nugget. Wait a second. Martin, you don't know what tater tots are? Oh, I got to get you from Mexico to here. We're going to make you some tots. Oh, I'll take you to, there's a couple places here that make the best tots I've ever had, even better than we make here in my own house. They're incredible, and I love them. I'm a huge, huge fan. Thank you so much, Heather. I appreciate it. So the Hebrew word for seed-bearing plant, thank you, Ted. I appreciate it. The Hebrew word for seed-bearing plant is zera, implying a garden with abundance where plants are designed to continually reproduce. Now, my buddy, Martin, he has an excellent garden, and he tends to it himself. He does everything himself, and he does gardening very ecologically intelligent and just intelligent in general. You plant things certain times, certain ways, near certain things for reasons. And he knows all that stuff. Okay, so I just got a notification. We're up on iHeartRadio. So this reflects an ideal creation, if you think about it. How smart is that, right? Plant something that reproduces itself. It's a state of shalom, if you will, or perfect peace, absence of chaos. Oh, where's my food coming from? Well, you don't even have to worry about that. That's what's incredible here. You don't even have to worry about it. So here we go. We're in this place where life is sustained, and guess what else? No other creatures are being harmed. So before the fall, Adam and Eve, they thrived on a diet of plants, fruits, and seeds, and they didn't lack anything until that forbidden fruit came into play. So can you imagine Adam and Eve's reaction if they saw a tater tot, much like Martin probably? Look, it's like manna, but crispy. So post-flood diet. So this is where meat was introduced. And we're going to go into a lot of detail. So hang on there. This is just the introduction. So the introduction of meat. Let me just first say, I love meat. I love meat. I love my friend in Alaska. She's like a superstar fisherman woman. I don't know which it is. Maybe you know. I don't know what's grammatically correct. She would laugh if I called her a fisher person. But she's like catches 125-pound fish, even bigger. And, she really, really is a fisher person. She loves to fish. She's very, very good at it. And so I love meat. I love meat of all kinds. I'm not against meat. I have no issue with meat at all. But after the flood, God expanded the human diet to include meat. As noted in Genesis 9, 3 through 4, if you're writing them down. Now, I'm going to read this from the Legacy Standard Bible because I think it really puts it plain. Every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you, as with the green plant, I give all to you. Did you catch that? Every moving thing. Hey, Mary, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Oh, a 9-week-old puppy Gibbs. I bet that is exhausting. We just went through, Mary Jones says she couldn't watch it while live because she's spending time with her 9-week-old puppy Gibbs. And you know how that is, man. You have a puppy. Put in the comments what kind of puppy it is. I don't know about bugs. I don't think they ate bugs. I don't think they had bugs, to be honest. Heather asked a good question. Well, what about bugs? Hey, and Miss Sharon, if you're listening, I want to know how your puppy's doing, how your dog is doing. I know you, I think your dog had the same thing that our dog had. Our dog almost died. $3,000 later, but worth it at twice the price. He's good to go. Podcast Puppy is hanging with Nana today because she's off from work, so bank holiday and whatnot. So God sets a condition here, though. He doesn't just say, hey, Ted says, I will not eat bugs and be happy. Now, because of my background, I had to learn. I went to this thing called SEER school, and that taught you how to avoid being captured and then how to survive if you're captured. And in that, we learned what we could eat, what we couldn't eat. Then I went to a foraging school, how to survive out in the wild in different types of places. And, they're not great. I don't love them. But, man, when I tell you, when you're hungry, when you're so hungry, that's, you're going to eat some bugs. You're going to eat whatever it takes. Certain things you better not eat or you'll die faster. So God sets a condition here. He says, however, flesh with its life, that is, its blood, you shall not eat. So in Hebrew, the word for life here is nephesh. Remember, I've talked about that. That's what God, thank you, Heather. That's what God calls us. Nephesh is his word for us as humans is nephesh, the being that prays, right? But it also is translated the soul or life force of the creature, the breath of the creature. This command reflects reverence for life itself. So God's demonstrating his reverence for life itself. And that belongs to God alone. Life belongs to God. So from this point on, meat became a part of the diet, but it had restrictions, especially for Israel under the Torah. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at the average diet and just talk about different things that they've eaten. I just think it's fascinating, and my buddy Dennis, it was a really, really great question, quite frankly. Really, really good question. So let's look at the typical diet of the average person post-flood. Now, this is important for us. This is important for us to recognize. This is post-flood. Right, in ancient Israel, food was centered around agriculture. So here's a breakdown. Grains. Barley, wheat, and spelt were common. Bread was the staple, it actually symbolized life. And in Hebrew, bread, lechem, it became synonymous with food itself, which life, lechem, Beit Lechem, which is Bethlehem, the land of, the place of life, the place of bread. Bread was life in that environment. So then legumes or legumes. Legumes, I'm not sure which. Lentils and beans were essential protein sources. When Miss Colleen would die because she don't like no beans. I love lentil soup, by the way. We can talk about that in a second. When Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of lentil stew, it showed the importance of these humble foods. So Genesis 25:34, then Yaakov gave him bread and lentil stew. He ate and drank, got up, and went on his way. Thus, Esau showed how little he valued his birthright. So then fruits, grapes, figs, dates, and pomegranates, often dried. They were stapled. So they would dry them. Why? Because they would last. Hey, Ted, you get your rest, brother. Thank you so much. It'll be here in the morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great, great day. Ted's many hours ahead of us, and so he has got to sleep. Sleep well, brother. Grapes, figs, dates, and pomegranates. And so they would dry them. Now, I want to say just really quick about the legumes, whatever. They keep a long time. If you do them right, they keep a long time. And that was smart because you could accumulate them and then use them as you needed them. So we're going to talk about how that symbolizes, in some ways, wealth later on, and in different parts of the culture. So I like grapes. I love figs. I love dates. Pomegranates, I don't know. I have mixed emotions about pomegranates. I don't know about you. I just find them hard to eat. And maybe there's just a trick. I got to lean back here because I can't hold myself up. So I got to cheat here a little bit. So pomegranates, I just find them tricky. I find them just a challenge. Just, they've got all those little, do you eat the little seeds in them? What is there to eat? I don't know. I need somebody to show me the right way to do it. But a lot of times they were dried too. And they were staples in the diet. So vegetables. I'm just going to tell you, I love vegetables. I am a vegetable person. I am. Yeah, I've had pomegranate juice and I like it okay. I like it. I don't love it. Now, if you mix pomegranate and grape, love it. It's so high in sugar, natural sugar, true, but being a diabetic, I have to be careful with such things. So vegetables, onions, garlic, cucumbers, and leeks, they're mentioned in Numbers 11:5. We remember the fish we used to eat in Egypt. It cost us nothing. And the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. Right, so they were lamenting, oh, we used to have this. But they're all named, right? So dairy, milk, cheese, and yogurt from goats or sheep, they were important in this sort of lifestyle. And I'll be honest, I don't know how they kept milk. I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did know, but I don't know. So I'm not going to make it up. But they were all important. I like yogurt. I do like yogurt. I don't drink milk. Chocolate milk I'll drink. By the way, Sea Hag Marina right here in Steenhatchee, Florida. They're just gutting it out down there. They're pretty darn amazing, the work that they're doing. Miss Danielle, God bless you and all those workers and all those aid workers that are there. The people that are still there, the national news has walked away. It's no longer a story, It's no longer a story, and these people are still suffering. They still are without a home. So I don't know. I wish that the country had a better sense of help. I wish it's the surge, this initial surge, and then boom, it's gone. Steenhatchee, of course, is where Helene hit. 20-foot surge. It was unreal. Never happened before. In fact, she has a sign. If you go to the Sea Hag Marina Facebook page or any of that, they'll have a sign. They have a sign how tall the water was. It's utterly stunning. 20 feet high. Come on. So anyway, I'm repping them today. God bless them. Anyway, Great place to fish. You're talking about fish. So here we are at fish. So this was a common food for those near the Mediterranean or Galilee. And that, you look at Yeshua and you look at the disciples. The disciples many of them were fishermen. Some commercial fishermen, right? They caught fish for a living. And so if you lived, near the Mediterranean or Galilee, you would fish. Fish would be part of your diet, right? Comes out of the water. You cook it up, grill it. I don't know how they made it. They made it all kinds of ways. But it's good. I love fish. I love all kinds of fish. I like a real, I don't know about you, maybe this is different for you, but I like a real white, dense, but light tasting fish, with the exception of certain, what's the word I'm thinking of? Salmon. There's some salmon, boy, if they're done right with a little bit of lemon, I put lemon on it. I don't know if that's the right thing. Anyway, I just like it. I like meat. I like fish. I really like fish. I could eat fish every day, truth be told. I really could. I love seafood in general. But then we get to meat. So meat was consumed less frequently. It wasn't something that, it wasn't eaten a lot. Animals, though, were used for sacrifices or special occasions. So imagine Esau's thought process, by the way. Have you ever thought of this? Okay, I'll trade my birthright for this lentil stew. Well, at least it's not gluten-free, so it's worth it. It's non-GMO. What are the other words? Organic, yeah. Yeah, I like all that stuff. As natural as I can get is what I want. So royal diets, there was royalty then. They had kings, feasts fit for kings. So royalty in biblical times, as you might imagine, they enjoyed richer and more varied diets. And their diets included meats, lamb, beef, poultry, and even game, wild game. If it met their dietary, we're going to talk about the dietary rules. So, but they also had the wealth. They also had the wealth to import things, right? So we can't imagine the disparity in wealth. But the reality of it is there is a disparity in wealth. Of course, there's going to be a disparity in wealth. And so that being said, the people who were royals, they could get exotic spices, they could get, imported wines. Let's talk about King Solomon, dollar for dollar, was considered to be the wealthiest person ever in history. And the wisest, it said. Now, I go to sleep right now. I use this program called Dwell. Now, they don't pay me to promote their program, but I really like it. And they have a free trial. You try it free for 7 days. And then I want to say it's $39 or $49 a year. Some amount like that. And I love it. I go to sleep, and throughout the day, I will listen to Scripture in my ears. And I love it. It's an app. I don't know if it's available for Android. Probably is, but I don't know that for sure. But I have it on Apple. I have iPhone. So anyway, Dwell is the name of it. So I go to sleep hearing that while I'm in Solomon right now, Songs of Solomon. Ooh, spicy. And I don't mean in the powdery dry sense. Mm-hmm. Lord. It goes into detail about some stuff. Anyway, so King Solomon's wealth, it's shown in his provisions that it naturally would, including 30 cores of the finest flour and 60 cores of meal. And that showed abundance, and I'll talk about what a core is here in a second. I try to, if I use a word, remind me if I don't define it for you, a word that you don't know, if I don't define it, please let me know in comments, and I will define it. I apologize if I've missed some. But cores, 60 cores of the finest flour and 30 cores of the finest flour and 60 cores of meal. So this reflected abundance, man. That's a lot. So 1 Kings 4:22 and 23. And Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cors of fine flour and 60 cors of meal, 10 fat oxen, not the skinny ones, the fat ones, 20 pasture-fed oxen, pasture raised, 100 sheep besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. A core. So what's a core? We read that. We make a guess. And you may have a reference Bible that maybe it's a study Bible, and it might have the listing of that in there somewhere. I think most people don't even go to use these tables, and they go, what's this amount? Let your curiosity run away with you when it comes to your reading of the Bible, because you can look up things like that. And there's lots of resources. It's pretty cool. Anyway, a core is a Hebrew unit of measure used to quantify large volumes, particularly of dry goods, such as grain, and it's equivalent to about 220 liters, roughly 6.2 bushels, or approximately, if you're going to use gallons, 55 gallons, so 55-gallon drum. The core was one of the larger units for dry measures, and it was used in context involving significant quantities of produce or provisions. So if you're measuring something by a core, you got a lot. So if you got 30 or 60 cores, that's a lot. So banquets, the Hebrew word for banquets is mishteh. So they were celebrations with plentiful food and wine and feasting, right? So we have a banquet. We go to a banquet now, right? We hear that word banquet, and we're like, oh, okay, yeah, I remember that. There's going to be a meal. I've been to lots of banquets, and they're nice. They're nice. Sometimes they're black tie. Sometimes they're fancy. Sometimes they're just plain, just regular. And but they're fun. Church banquets are a lot of fun. I've been to other banquets too. Our family reunion. I used to go to that a lot. My whole life, actually, I went to it, and they're in Starr, Maryland, and that was like a banquet because everybody brought foods that they made and things they were really good at making. We had a lot of farmers in our family, and so they would bring the bounty. It's pretty cool. So banquets or mishteh, these are that. That's what that is. And what feasting symbolized was blessings and abundance. So it wasn't just, oh, we get to eat a lot. This is representative of blessings and abundance. You're given thanks for all those things. Now, you can argue with this all you want, but wine was a central part of royal feasts consumed in large quantities. But I want to say this about wine. And I don't defend the wine industry. I don't have an interest. I don't have a dog in the hunt, if you will. I don't have a horse in the race. I hear a lot of people say that they'll say to me, well, wine, it wasn't what it was said to be before. It was different. It was non-alcoholic, or it was so low in alcohol that no. That's not true. Don't believe the hype. That is absolutely not true. And I want you to understand, I appreciate, where you're coming from with that, but the reality of it is that's not true. Wine back in this time in this culture was super strong. It was super, super strong. Sure, let's let go of that one. And everybody drank the wine. So Daniel 1:5, the king assigned them a daily portion of his own food and the wine he drank, and they were to be cared for in this way for 3 years. Now, I think if you've read this before, and maybe you have, maybe you haven't, maybe you're new to it. If you've read it before, you might be thinking, interesting. Let's read it again. The king assigned them a daily portion of his own food. Now, Daniel and his buddies, they weren't royalty, right? So the king thought so highly of them, he gave them some of his own food and some of his own wine, and they were to be cared for in this way for 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, at the end of this time, they were to become the king's attendants. And Daniel and his friends, instead of choosing the king's food, which was a big deal, let's be honest, that was a really big deal. Instead of choosing the king's food, they chose vegetables. They chose vegetables and they chose water over the Babylonian king's rich foods. Sometimes, and then this demonstrates this, sometimes obedience meant a simpler diet. It was as simple as that, simple diet. I made a choice. I'm not going to eat all that fancy food. I'm going to eat just this, vegetables and water. We're going to talk about the Daniel diet here in a minute. So can you imagine King Solomon's chefs? Have you ever thought about that? When he ordered 10 head of cattle, 100 sheep, and a gazelle, it'd be like, relax, no pressure, everybody. It's just for lunch. This is just lunch. I just think about, man, what incredible wealth. So let's buzzsaw through some popular so-called biblical diets. Because I mentioned the Daniel diet. I think it's only fair that I bring up some of the other diets, and I'll give it a little bit of detail. I'm not endorsing any of these, and I'm not dispelling any of these. I'm not saying any of these are good or bad. I'm not a nutritionist. My dear friend Martin, he is super smart, and he is an expert in diets, nutritional plans, and he's, in addition to being a MD and all these other super cool things that he is. Good morning, Jackie. He knows so much about nutrition. It's unreal. Anyway, all that said to say, I'm going to buzzsaw through these. I'm not doing any of these justice. I'm not doing any of these harm. I'm just, so you know. So, and you might say, well, what do you mean biblical diets? Well, over the past few decades, several of the so-called biblical diets, they've gained some popularity, and some of them are popular now. I don't know where some of them went. You used to hear a lot about some of them, then they're gone. And maybe, maybe you've done one. Maybe put in comments, if you're listening to this, put in comments whether you've done these diets and how you made out on them. Maybe you're still on them. Maybe you've adopted that. There's a guy named Titus in Liberty or Libertyville, Kentucky. A guy by the name of Peter Santinello befriended him, and Titus totally changed his life. He lives very minimalist, and Peter Santinello travels all around the world, just experiencing places and interviewing people and telling stories, and true stories, all true stories. And he came across Titus, and you can't help but to love Titus. But Titus lives a very specific way in the ancient ways, and he does it based on the Bible. I'm not advocating that for anybody. I'm not saying that makes you any more holy or not. What I'm just saying is I think you need to know. So I'm going to give you some of the prominent examples, not all of them, and then I'm going to give you the scriptures that they cite to support them. So the Daniel fast. I think that has a good bit of popularity because I've heard of that. I've really, really heard of that. That's something I ran across a fair bit. So the Daniel fast, it's inspired by the prophet Daniel's dietary choices in Babylon. He abstained from the royal food and he ate only vegetables. Remember, vegetables and water for spiritual clarity and strength. So this fast typically involves eating only plant-based foods like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts. And he avoided meats, sweets, and processed food. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't love processed food. I will eat processed food, but I don't love it. My body seems to like just regular stuff. I have multiple doctorates, but none of them are in nutrition. But I will tell you, I just think we're healthier when we try to limit the amount of processed foods that we eat. So, that's what this is. They call it the Daniel fast. So again, plant-based foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, avoiding meat, avoiding sweets, and processed foods. So where they derive this, their scriptural basis is Daniel 1:12, if you're writing this down. Please try an experiment on your servants for 10 days. Have them give us only vegetables to eat and water to drink. Daniel 10:3, I didn't eat any food that satisfied me. Neither meat nor wine entered my mouth, and I didn't anoint myself at all until 3 full weeks had passed. Now, that's a Daniel fast. Now, I'm not giving medical advice here. I want to be clear about this. I'm diabetic, and, I'm a pretty serious diabetic. I mean, it came as a result of failing organs and this and that. But all that said, it's you got to take these things seriously. You got to be under the advisement of a professional. So I'm not a professional, and I'm not giving you medical advice or nutritional advice. So what's the concept here, though? The diet emphasizes simplicity, purity, and self-discipline, and it draws from Daniel's example as he remained devoted to God's commandments, even in a foreign land. So it's often practiced as a fast for spiritual focus rather than long-term dietary plan. This next one I'm sure you've heard. This one was huge years ago, and I don't know if it's huge now. I don't know whatever happened to this guy, but he was prominent. He was everywhere. The Maker's Diet. The Maker's Diet. And let me know in comments. Maybe you've heard of it. Maybe you've done it. How did you make out on it? What was your experience? So Jordan Rubin, very popular guy for a very long time. So this Maker's Diet is based on principles from the Torah. It emphasizes clean eating, avoiding foods considered unclean. Now, we're going to talk in detail. I'm going to touch that third rail here in a few minutes. But hang with me, because that one's going to be a tough one. It's going to be controversial for a lot of people. So this diet includes whole natural foods, focusing on organic and unprocessed options, avoiding pork and shellfish and other foods. I think the whole 30. Ever hear of that one? Lynette does that one, and she's had great success with it, and her friends have had great success with it. I've done it sort of a modified version, 8 weeks to wellness. I think it's the one we did, and I tell you, if you eat like that, you're going to be healthy. It's just the way it is. It's just truth. So Leviticus 11:2. Now, we're going to come back to this. I'm going to go over this quickly, but then we're going to come back to this. Tell the people of Israel, these are the living creatures which you may eat among all the land animals. Deuteronomy 14:8. A pig is unclean for you because although it has a split hoof, it doesn't chew the cud, and you are not to eat their meat or touch their carcasses. So this was a command to the Jews here. So Reuben's diet, Jordan Reuben, promotes the idea that God's instructions on clean and unclean foods were for health purposes, designed to help people avoid illnesses associated with certain foods. So this diet encourages eating according to what was permissible in the Bible, often referred to as a kosher lifestyle. Again, I'm going to touch the third rail in just a minute. I want to get through a couple of these first. The Hallelujah Diet. The Hallelujah Diet. Now, I had not heard of this. I've never heard of this one. But as I was doing research for this, I thought, interesting. So this was founded by Reverend George Malcolmus. And he advocates a primarily raw, plant-based diet inspired by Genesis 1:29. It's built in the belief that Adam and Eve's original diet in the Garden of Eden consisted solely of plant-based foods, and it made it the ideal diet for humanity. And I get it. Genesis 1:29 again, if you've forgotten, God said, "Here throughout the whole earth, I am giving you as food every seed-bearing plant and every tree with seed-bearing fruit." So Malcolmus argues that following this original plant-based diet, helps people experience health and vitality as God intended. And I don't think I can argue with that if everybody's, like in the Garden of Eden, there was no variance in temperature or seasons, all of these things. It was perfection all the time. I imagine it as San Diego weather all the time, So, hey, Samantha, how are you? Good to see you. So, so I have to say, there was a big difference between the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden, and now, depending on where you live, you may live in Minnesota, like my buddy Scott, who congratulations, we've been praying for Scott Brodeen, and he won. So he's on the council. He's going to serve very honorably. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, and a great servant, and he loves God and loves the Lord. So in Minnesota in the winter, you're not going to be growing. It's because it's just the seasons are incredibly harsh. So, but this diet emphasizes raw fruits and vegetables and whole grains, seeds, nuts, different kinds of nuts. I like the pine nuts. Cashews are not a nut. They're a legume. Did not know that. And then it excludes all animal products, processed foods, additives. And what their goal here is, and I get it, I 100% get it, you aim for purity and you aim for alignment with what God's ideal provision was. And I think that I get that. I don't have a quarrel with that at all. I really don't. It's forks over knives. Jackie says, welcome, Jackie. Forks over. Jackie's listening from the Facebook live feed. Forks. So thank you for joining us. Forks Over Knives is a good magazine and app. I am diabetic also, trying to stay whole foods, plant-based diet. WFPB. Whole foods, plant-based. I feel so much better when I don't eat a lot of meat and processed foods. Yeah, I totally get that. I love vegetables. I could live on vegetables. I love walnuts too. I don't love almonds, but I love walnuts. But it has to be a really good walnut because, man, if they're not, they taste sort of sour. Depends on how they process them. But when they're good, they're really good. Now, unfortunately, I like walnuts and sticky buns and stuff like that. Which, by the way, I proved they exist. Miss Colleen, and she didn't believe that they exist, neither did my son Doyle. But they do exist, and they are wonderful. So I'm going to touch the third rail. What will we do without a little bit of controversy? So now comes number 4, the Levitical diet. I'm going to say some stuff you're not going to love. It's okay. It's a choice I've made. I don't observe this. I'm not observant, but I recognize it as God's command, and I'll explain why. The Levitical diet. Clean and unclean foods. I can see the people tuning out right now. Click, click, click. Off you go. I'm not going to subscribe to him. He's a crazy person. Well, I am a crazy person, but that's not a good enough reason not to stay subscribed. Good lands. So the Levitical diet, it's aptly named. It aligns with traditional Jewish dietary laws, which are called kashrut. And it's followed by some Christians, Protestants, Catholics, others, and followers of the way, who believe that observing these dietary guidelines leads to better health. And this diet involves adhering to the laws of clean and unclean animals, as outlined in Leviticus 11, focusing on foods permissible under Mosaic law. So there is a scriptural basis for it. There is absolutely a scriptural basis for it. Leviticus, I'll read it again, 11:9. Of all the creatures that live in the water, you may eat these, any that has fins and scales. Any that has fins and scales. Leviticus 11:46. I don't have time to read the whole thing, so I'm just going to give you bits and pieces. You don't have time for me to read the whole thing. But write it down and read Leviticus, the whole of Leviticus 11. It's fantastic. Leviticus 11, for now, 46, 47. This is the law concerning animals, birds, all living creatures that move about in the water, all creatures that swarm on the ground. Its purpose is to distinguish between the clean and the unclean, and between the creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. Hang on with me now. Don't give up. I got some hope for you. So this diet emphasizes obedience to God's instructions on what's considered clean and unclean. And the belief is that these dietary restrictions have health benefits, such as avoiding parasites and toxins found in prohibited foods. Now I can hear you now. You're probably thinking, hey, hadn't that been abolished? Or, hey man, break out of the Old Testament. This is the New Testament, man. Yeshua did away with all that. Jesus did away with all that. Slow down, Slam Dancer. little bit more to cover here. The argument that God never abolished the dietary laws in Leviticus 11 and that they remain relevant for believers today is based on several scriptural, theological, and cultural points. Now, you'll remember, and this is under the live tab, where Jerry and Myra Mitchell were on the show. They're dear friends of mine, been friends of mine my whole life, and I love them dearly. And so their adherence they've adopted, they're followers of the way, but they've adopted sort of a messianic lifestyle. And it's interesting, it's fascinating to me. And so I'm going to do a whole show on this, by the way, and I'm going to have them on here because they know their stuff and they live this. So God's laws are everlasting. I'm going to explain why. I've got to tell you, I support this. I support it. I'll show you how I don't see this. And you say, well, you've said yourself that you don't observe all the Levitical laws. I'm a work in progress. I told you, don't hold me up as some super dude, because I'm not. I'll tell you right now, I'm not. I'm a work in progress. I am afflicted, as my buddy Chuck says. God's laws are everlasting. Now, advocates for the ongoing observance of Levitical dietary laws, they argue that these laws were given as part of God's eternal covenant with Israel, intended to be followed for all generations. Now, you might say, well, I'm not Israel. Hang on, Slam Dancer. Slow down, Slam Dancer. We're going to get to that. Many times, God states that the laws are forever or throughout all generations, which they interpret as indicating an unending application. So again, Leviticus 11, 46 to 47, this is the law concerning animals, birds, all living creatures that move about in the water, and all creatures that swarm on the ground. Its purpose is to distinguish between clean, unclean, and clean, and between the creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. But Leviticus 11:44, it's important to have this for context. For I am Adonai your God, therefore consecrate yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. He's saying, be like me. And do not defile yourselves with any kind of swarming creature that moves along the ground. So the command to be holy and separate is often cited to support the argument that dietary laws are part of a unique calling for God's people. And it's intended to set us apart from other nations. Now, here's number 2. Yeshua did not abolish the law. So I, along with many other theologians, way smarter theologians than me, argue that Yeshua, Jesus, explicitly stated that he did not come to abolish the Torah, the law, but to fulfill it. And this means to live it out perfectly, not to negate its observance. So Matthew 5, 17 and 18, don't think that this is Yeshua speaking, don't think that I've come to abolish the Torah or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to complete. Yes, indeed, I tell you that until heaven and earth pass away, not so much as a yud or a stroke will pass from the Torah, not until everything that must happen has happened. And there are many that misinterpret until heaven and earth pass away as meaning the Torah's commands, including dietary laws, remain valid as long as the earth exists. Now, I agree with that. I've read this in Hebrew. I've read it in every way you can think of. I've studied it. I've written on it. I've preached a gazillion sermons on it. I've taught in Bible college on it. It's clear that in Hebrew, until heaven and earth pass away means the Torah's commands, dietary laws. All of this remains valid as long as the earth exists. Now you might say, well, it's so hard. It's just so hard. Yeah, of course it's hard. I say all the time, this is why the Jews don't have an evangelical wing, because it's hard, and it's intended to be hard. It's intended to be difficult. So Matthew 5, chapter 5, verse 17 and 18, Yeshua, he makes this profound statement about his relationship to the Torah, the law, and the prophets, and it has deep meaning in its original Hebrew context. He says again, in case you missed it, don't think I have come to abolish the Torah or the prophets. And in this context, the Torah, remember, if you're new to all this, that means the first 5 books of the Bible. And that contains God's commandments. So when Yeshua refers to the Torah and the prophets, he's talking about the entire Hebrew Scriptures, the Tanakh. That's what it's called, the Tanakh. The entirety of Hebrew Scriptures is referred to as the Tanakh. That's what it's called. So, in Jewish thought, the Torah represents God's revealed guidance, His instruction, and the way of life that He provided Israel. Now, you might say, well, how could you not eat bacon? Well, I do eat bacon. As again, I'm working in progress. And I have to say, though, the biblical Jews, when they looked at a pig, that didn't register as food for them. Because in their community, nobody ate a pig. They didn't look at a pig and go, I think I'm going to eat that. I'm going to cook that up and eat it. I'm going to smoke that meat and eat it. It's pork o'clock. No. They didn't even, that never crossed their mind. Because obedience to God, obeying the Torah, was center of mind. It was right there. This was what they did. So they never even they would never look at a pig and go, that's dinner. Never. It was just an animal. They weren't to touch it. It was unclean. Abolish here suggests destroying or rendering invalid. Well, Yeshua is affirming that He's not to set aside. He's not here. I'm not setting aside. I'm not breaking down. I'm not nullifying the Torah or the teachings of the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to complete. And in the phrase, not to abolish, but to complete translates the Greek word plerou. 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 And that's a Greek word. It's often translated as fulfill. And in a Hebrew sense, complete can mean to fulfill to fullness or fully reveal, rather to end or replace. So Yeshua is affirming that His purpose is to demonstrate the true intent of the Torah, filling it with meaning and showing it His deepest appreciation. Understand, from a Hebraic perspective, Yeshua's life and teachings, they're understood as bringing Torah to its fullest expression, living out God's will in a complete and perfect way. Well, then the passage says, until heaven and earth pass away. This phrase emphasizes the permanence of the Torah. Yeshua is saying that the Torah's commands will remain relevant as long as creation exists. The passing of heaven and earth is a strong figurative way of saying that these teachings are meant to endure throughout all of time. Well, then the passage says, not so much as a yud or a stroke will pass from the Torah. This is why I say you've got to learn Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. You got to work on that, because you might read this and you might say, I don't know what that is, but I don't know. It's not passing away. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me what it is. But we skip over, right? A lot of Christians, a lot of followers of the way say, well, that doesn't apply to me. It's the age of law versus the age of grace. It's Jesus came and that was it. Did away with all that. No, it did not. Here, Yeshua is referring to the Yud, which is the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And the stroke, or tittle, as it's called, was maybe a decorative stroke on the letters. So he's emphasizing not even the smallest detail of the Torah will disappear. So in Hebrew, each letter and stroke is essential, and it's seen as holding divine meaning. So the Yud is traditionally viewed as a symbol of humility, maybe divine presence, representing the care and sacredness of each part of the Torah. And then the passage goes and it says, not until everything that must happen has happened. Yeshua is underscoring the fact that the Torah will remain fully intact and relevant until every prophecy and purpose of God is fulfilled. So this completion in Hebraic thought, it refers to ultimate redemption of the world, and the establishment of God's kingdom. In essence, he's saying that the Torah's teachings are active, they're valuable, and will remain applicable until God's plan for creation is fully realized. Now, I understand you don't love that. You don't love that because you've been taught, look, it's been done away with. We're in the age of grace. I hope that I've just made clear. I hope that maybe this is kind of perked your mind up a little bit to go, okay. Yeshua was affirming the enduring relevance of the Torah. not just for the Jews, but for everybody. And his teachings review the true meaning. He's emphasizing that the Torah and the prophets are integral to understanding God's purpose. And here he speaks with an authority. He reminds his followers, which were followers of the way. They weren't all Jews. They had many Gentiles. Remember this. There were many Gentiles, many of them, who placed their faith in Yeshua. They acknowledged him as Messiah, and they followed him. It's tricky. It's tough. We don't love it because it's hard, and we love bacon, and we love pork ribs, and we love pork loin. It's always pork o'clock. I love steamed crabs, but they're forbidden. There's lots of things. Lots and lots of things. I don't love it. Don't love it or hate it or love it, whichever. I'm just telling you what Scripture says. I'm just telling you what it means. So Yeshua calls his followers, and that's us, right? That's us. If we're followers of the way, we're his followers, to see the Torah as an essential guide to live by. And what's this do? This reflects God's holiness until the ultimate fulfillment of all things. And that's at a point. That's coming. So I hope that gives you sufficient, if you've stayed tuned in, I hope that gives you sufficient background on this common misinterpretation, this mistranslation, this misrepresentation. And if you're a pastor and this is the first time you've ever heard it this way, look, don't feel bad. I know it puts you in a difficult place. You're like, I've been preaching my face off here all these years, saying all this was done away with, and now you tell me this, and I'm not loving how that feels. Well, I get it. I get it, man. I do. I get it. I do. Hey, KK. I do get it. I 100% get it. I get the challenge for you. Can't turn the Titanic around in a teacup. Sometimes you got to go slow with it. Take it on a little bit at a time. Little bit at a time. So then we're back to the Council of Jerusalem and the Gentile believers. So in the book of Acts, this is the Council of Jerusalem. It addressed the issue of whether Gentile believers should follow all of the Torah's laws. And while the council did make concessions, it did. It explicitly required Gentiles to abstain from certain practices associated with idolatry, paganism, including abstaining from blood and things strangled, which fall under the dietary laws, Acts 15:20. Instead, we should write them in a letter telling them to abstain from things polluted by idols, from fornication, from which is strangled, and from blood. So the council they didn't impose all Torah laws on Gentile converts. What it did was it highlighted certain dietary restrictions related to purity and the sanctity of blood. And advocates argue that these core dietary restrictions were maintained for all believers. I'm one of those advocates. I'm absolutely one of those advocates. So, KK, we're going to get to that. So Peter's vision in Acts 10 wasn't about food. And I know you're hearing this going, oh, you're hurting my brain, Dr. Shawn, you're hurting my brain. Listen, when I first started hearing this teaching, it hurt my brain too. So in Acts 10, Peter, or Kepha, as his real name was, has a vision of a sheet descending from heaven with various animals, and he hears a voice telling him to kill and eat. And some interpret this as an abolishment of dietary laws, but advocates for the ongoing, of which I am, observance of these laws argue that the vision was symbolic, teaching Peter that Gentiles should not be considered unclean, rather than changing food laws. If you look at that passage in context, which we're going to break it down, he's making an analogy, and Gentiles were considered unclean. And so some of the disciples didn't want to minister to the Gentiles. They said, no, they're unclean. This is not for them. It's for us, God's chosen people. But changes here. So Acts 10:28. Peter himself interprets the vision saying, God has shown me not to call any person common or unclean. So other supporters of dietary law observance argue that this vision was not intended to permit unclean foods, but to signify the inclusion of Gentiles into this faith, the body of faith. So there are health benefits and practical wisdom with the dietary laws, especially as it related back then. Remember, they didn't have refrigerators, right? There were certain things they didn't know about the processing of food. You know what I'm saying? So there are benefits, there are health benefits, there are practical wisdom. Some of those things aren't relevant today because of what we know, and we have refrigeration and on all these other things. But some argue that God's dietary laws were given for health reasons. They were. And many continue to offer this wisdom for dietary choices today. It's just simply true. If you observe them, typically you're going to be healthier. Again, not medical advice. I'm not a medical doctor. I got lots of doctorates on the wall, but I do not have an MD. And I'm not a doctor. I don't have a doctorate in nutrition. So many cite the potential dangers of eating certain animals labeled unclean in Leviticus, such as pork, which can carry parasites such as trichinosis, and shellfish, which can harbor toxins. I know this for a fact. I've eaten crabs that were bad, and they made me sick, and there's no way to know. Well, there's some way to know, but not much. But again, pork, we know so much more about it. The incidence of trichinosis from eating pork is virtually nil. That being the case, there's not a provision for that in Scripture. The Scripture is silent about advancements. I don't know. You're going to have to make that decision yourself on that. So this perspective, it suggests that God's commands were designed with human health in mind. In observing these dietary laws, it aligns with His care for the physical well-being of His people. But in number 6, Ezekiel's vision for the future temple sacrifices. This is kind of an important thing. So some proponents argue that since the dietary laws are part of the ceremonial system and Ezekiel's prophecy includes the return of the sacrifices, this implies that dietary laws may also remain in effect. So Ezekiel describes a restored temple with offerings and sacrifices, suggesting that certain aspects of Torah law may continue or be restored in a future messianic era. This is talked about in Ezekiel 44:23. They are to teach my people the difference between holy and common, and enable them to distinguish between clean and unclean. Common is a euphemism for unclean. So number 7, Hebrew understanding of clean and unclean. In Hebrew thought, purity and holiness. I hope you're being blessed by this, by the way. Hope this is helpful. Hope it makes you think, and I appreciate it. If you're new to this channel, click on subscribe, click on the little bell. I appreciate that too. So in Hebrew thought, purity and holiness are linked to physical and spiritual health. So observing dietary laws can be seen not only as an obedience to God, it means to maintain spiritual and physical purity. So God's people were instructed to differentiate between clean and unclean animals, which was symbolic of living a life set apart for Him. Let me see, we have a question here. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Yeshua say that it's not what goes in your mouth that defiles, but what comes out of your mouth that defiles you? Yes. There's a very, very specific context to that, though, which is important to differentiate. That's a different context. And then KK says, they are creation's garbage cleaners, pigs, shrimp, certain birds. But yeah, I do a teaching on that, Samantha, and I'll teach a little bit deeper about that. But yeah, but he was specifically speaking, making an analogy there, Yeshua was saying. So when we're saying we're going to live a life set apart, right? We're going to be sanctified, which means to be set apart. Sometimes we'll say that. We'll say, well, I say certain words and I dress a certain way. I don't do certain things. Well, it goes deeper than that. It's all of our life, including what we eat, what we do, all those things. You bet, Samantha, I'm happy to do it. Thank you for asking. Leviticus 20:25 through 26. You are to distinguish between clean and unclean animals, between clean and unclean birds. Do not make yourself detestable with any animal, bird, or creature which moves along the ground, which I have set apart for you to regard as unclean. Rather, you people are to be holy for me, because I, Adonai, am holy. A lot of folks believe these laws serve as a reminder to maintain holiness in all aspects of life, including what we eat. Well, then we have the teachings of Paul on holiness and the law, Shaul. Paul's writings, they Look, he's complicated. He was a complex guy, and his teachings were complex. So he teaches and writes about the role of Torah for Gentile believers, right? That's us. Unless you're a Messianic Jew, you're a Gentile believer. But advocates argue that Paul's teaching about the freedom from the law, it refers to freedom from legalism, or the belief that salvation depends on following the law, rather than obedience to God's commands as a response to grace. I'll give you an example. Romans 3:31. Does it follow that we abolish Torah by this trusting? Heaven forbid. On the contrary, we confirm Torah. Right, this is New Testament here. This is Romans 3:31. Does it follow that we abolish Torah by this trusting? Heaven forbid. On the contrary, we confirm Torah. I and others interpret this as Paul or Shawn affirming the Torah, including dietary laws. This still has a role for believers. Other supporters of continuing to observe the Levitical dietary laws argue that these laws reflect God's design for his people, emphasizing holiness. We don't like to talk about holiness. We don't, because it's so, in our minds, it's so unattainable. Why? Why try? We'll just make ourselves crazy. Now, holiness, health, and obedience. We don't love obedience either. We believe that God's commandments remain applicable unless clearly abolished in Scripture, and find that neither Yeshua nor the apostles explicitly abolished dietary laws. Instead, we interpret the New Testament as providing a deeper understanding of purity and inclusiveness without negating the dietary laws themselves. Now, let me just say this. When we have Jerry and Myra on again, this is going to be a discussion. We're going to have a discussion. We're going to talk about this. But they're greater experts on this than me, because, quite frankly, they've lived it for a long, long time. So, number 5, the biblical feast diet. We're back to the diets, the biblical feast diet. And I'm almost finished, so hang on with me. This diet focuses on eating seasonally, including foods. Remember what I mentioned before, we have seasons. In certain places you have seasons. So it's not like the Gan Eden or Garden of Eden where it's one season. Everything's growing all the time. It's perfect. Everything's perfect. We have seasons. And because we have seasons, you can't go tomatoes outside in the winter because it's 3 feet of snow if you live in Minnesota or Buffalo or some parts of Alaska. You know what I mean? You're not, or the Yukon. You're not, or Germany. You're not growing tomatoes in the winter outside. So you eat seasonally. That's what this diet, the biblical feast diet, emphasizes. Foods mentioned in the Bible, particularly those eaten during biblical feasts, such as Passover, first fruits, and Sukkot, feasts of the tabernacles. It draws on foods that were part of the ancient Israeli diet, including lamb. I don't love lamb, although my buddy Dennis tells me he can make me lamb and I'll love it. Fish. Love all kinds of fish. Figs, love fish, love dates, and unleavened bread. I've had some really great bread. I've had challah, which is really incredible. I can't make it. I'm going to learn to make it, but unleavened bread, it's tricky, man. Unleavened bread is tricky. So Exodus 12:8, this is the Passover. That night, they are to eat the meat, roasted in the fire. They are to eat it with matzah and maror. Leviticus 23:10, first fruits. Tell the people of Israel, after you enter the land I am giving you, and harvest its ripe crops, you are to bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the Kohen. Leviticus 23:4, that's Sukkot. On the first day you are to take choice fruit, palm fronds, thick branches, and river willows, and celebrate in the presence of Adonai your God for 7 days. Now, this is the concept of it. You get it. You're smart people. This diet is less about restriction and more about celebrating biblical principles through food associated with the feasts and festivals. And it emphasizes the seasons and cycles of food that reflect God's provision and timing. Now, Again, Jerry and Mike, we're going to have Jerry and Mike. Jerry and Myra, we're going to have a discussion, a really frank discussion about this. And they're going to give you examples of it, because I've been to different celebrations that they had, and you eat the foods and you celebrate and you learn you remember, we remember, the purposes of this. So now here's one that I think you're going to find interesting. And I don't know that I've heard a lot about it. It's called the Edenic diet. The Edenic diet. So in other words, of Eden. So similar to the Hallelujah diet, the Edenic diet focuses on returning to the Garden of Eden diet. And what they're doing here is it's a spiritual and health practice. And so adherents believe that the diet gave Adam and Eve fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. It's the most suitable for human health and spiritual wellness. Now, I would say to you, again, remember, that depends on where you live, right? Because how are you going to get those things? You're going to have to ship those things in. How are they going to survive the trip if they're all organic and completely natural, no additives, right? How's that going to happen? Can you grow them? Can you grow enough? Well, what do you do to hold on to them? Canning, and I know, that I don't can, but I admire people that know how to do it. It's tricky. It's just super cool. They can the craziest things. So here's the scriptural basis. Genesis 1:29. God said, "Here throughout the whole earth I'm giving you as food for every seed-bearing plant and every tree with seed-bearing fruit." Again, it's the Edenic diet is strictly plant-based. It emphasizes raw, whole foods and avoiding animal products, avoiding processed food, and all artificial ingredients. So advocates of this diet view it as aligning with humanity's original purpose and peaceful coexistence in Eden before the fall. Now these diets, all of the ones that I've mentioned, I told you I was near the end, they're diverse. They're diverse. You may have arguments with each one, and maybe put in comments. If you've made it this far, click on like, click on subscribe, click on the little bell. Thank you very much. Share it with your millions of friends. There's common themes: scriptural guidance, scriptural adherence, close to God, obedience, strict obedience, and the benefits of simple whole foods, right? We can't argue with that. The benefits of simple whole foods, cutting out the processed foods, meats deemed unclean by biblical standards. Muslims call that halal. If it's good, it's halal. If it's bad, it's haram, right? Jews call it kosher. It's kosher. There's certain ways to process it. So Adam and Eve's plant-based diet, it reflects paradise, right? A state of paradise. Well, they didn't need meat because everything was perfect. But after the flood, God expanded the human diet. It reminded us of the sacredness of life. For ancient Israelites, grains, fruits, vegetables, they formed the foundation, while royalty, they feasted. They had a lot of abundance. Now, you think God has a menu in heaven with tater tots in it. I hope there are. But I bet if there are, they're golden, they're perfectly crispy, divine tots with some sugar-free ketchup and some maybe Celtic salt or maybe Dead Sea salt. I don't know. I'll take some salt on it. Look, I appreciate you joining me. I know it's been silly. It's been a little bit tricky. I know that. And I want you to understand, I 100% understand the challenge it presents to you. Lots of people. And it's okay. I don't think we should be throwing rocks at people that observe and people that don't observe. You make a choice. We all make a choice in our lives. And this is a choice. What we eat is a choice. But I appreciate you hanging in there with me, joining me in this journey through the biblical diets. And I want you to experience God's abundant provision in all you eat and all you do. Shalom alaikum. Shalom. Shalom.